Well, the budget, as commonly understood, is nothing but a statement of income and expenditure. And when it is a government in a democratically elected country, the constitutional obligation is that it should put before the people what it is going to do by way of expenditure and where they are going to get the income for that expenditure. As simple as that. And the forum to do it in all parliamentary democracies is the parliament. That is because the parliament consists of people whom we all have elected. So they are really listening and deliberating on the issues on our behalf. That is the theoretical part of government budget being a public statement of income and expenditure. But in a country like India, it's not just a statement of income and expenditure. Of course, it is an income and expenditure statement. But what kind of expenditure, what kind of income government is going to get, it's of interest to many sections of the people. Partly because we all expect a lot from the government that we elect. That is because we are a society, we are still in the process of moving ourselves from largely a poor country to somewhat less poor. I will not say rich, although we have quite a few rich people. And most poor countries have quite a few rich people. So different sections of the people expect the government to announce schemes or concessions or welfare doles which they would like to have. So everyone will be looking at it. And one main section in India who is really rather sometimes not in a very dignified way and all the time talking about it is the urban middle class about income tax concessions. They deliberate it in their office, in their homes, in their friendship circles, how to avoid this tax, how to take advantage of this clause, that clause. And this government has really responded to their eagerness to give a lot of concessions by way of income tax. But before I do so, come to some of the details of this, let me say a few words which are not necessarily of an exciting nature. And we are going through a very difficult time, even as far as budget figures are concerned. And some of you might have read in the newspapers and magazines, especially economic newspapers and magazines, that there has been and we continue to have a controversy on how we calculate our national income, which is called the GDP, Gross Domestic Product. And that is, during a given year, how much income have we produced or generated by way of agriculture, by way of output in industry, by way of services, value of services in education, health, transport, tourism, all kinds of things. And for a country, it's for a household to find out this income is very easy, or a small firm. But for a country, especially of a size like that of us, 1.2 billion in 2011, now it must be close to 1.3 billion at the least. So you can imagine. And America is 300 million, okay? So America into 4, or more than 4.5, is the India's size in terms of population. Although in terms of the economy and in terms of the geographical area, we are considerably smaller. So that's the challenge. So to cut a long story short, this government has changed the methodology of calculating the GDP of this country last year or this year. And the experts have expressed deep disappointment and their differences with this change in methodology because they don't accept some of the changes in the methodology that they have effected. But the political motive for doing so, this is what the media is reporting, is that now compared to the 10 years of Dr. Manmohan Singh's regime, this regime is doing better. So it used to be 8 to 10% growth rate for India. The highest growth rate India has ever recorded since independence took place during Dr. Manmohan Singh's regime. Whether that by itself is the thing that we should be happy about, I don't know. Because I am one of those who are not very excited about only the obsession with aggregate economic growth. Because we need to have that growth. How is that growth benefiting ordinary people, younger people, the children, and the children who are going to come? So there are distributional issues, and that is why we now hear about increasing inequality. Inequality reports are coming. So growth by itself is not either good or bad. It's conditional. So, but nevertheless, we had very high growth rates during that period. That is now revised to around 7.5% or 7 to 7.5%. And during the last 4.5–5 years, the growth rate has been recalculated to exceed that by another 0.3%, so 7.6% or so. Now, this is not exactly dignified politics. It doesn't matter whether in one regime it is 7.3, in another regime it was 7.6. As I said earlier, it depends on how many people have been brought out of poverty, how many people who are unemployed have been given new jobs, how much agriculture has been pulled out of its backwardness. So these are substantive issues that should have engaged the attention. But there are reasons for that, because your credit rating in the international banking circles depend on your growth rates and all those kinds of things. So there is a certain international global politics also in hiking up, saying that you are. But in the process, what happens? The credibility of our statistical system goes down. And that's exactly what has happened. And international agencies have now started comparing India with China. Because China used to be a state, not any longer now as it was before, where statistics was secret. And it is rarely that it was available for international comparative purposes. So, or whatever statistics they used to put up, and World Bank and other international institutions used to go through various counterfactual or counter numbers on energy used, on transport services, and various kinds of things, and say that their numbers are inflated by 1 to 1.5%. So the credibility of the system goes down. We were never a country of that sort. We had one of the best credibility in terms of national statistics among the whole developing countries. And two of our national statistical institutions, that is the Central Statistical Organization, as well as the National Sample Survey, which is conducting yearly surveys on various themes, these were recognized internationally. They have taken a hit now. Now, when I say this, you might say, well, it's only in the case of GDP, what about other statistics? We have reasons to worry. We have reasons to worry because the latest employment and unemployment survey data has not been published by the government. The usual practice is, as it is unfortunately in India, employment and unemployment data is available only once in 5 years or once in 5–6 years. Those of you who are familiar with macroeconomics, you know we have figures on GDP, we have figures on our external debt, we have figures on our foreign exchange, we have figures on money supply, what we call the macroeconomic variables. Everything is there, but you don't get annual data on employment and unemployment. So many of us in the profession have been really arguing for an annual labor force survey data, which after last 10 years of discussion, argumentation, they had finally accepted. And this is the first of the new annual labor force survey which has come. Methodologically, it is the same as before, but now every year there will be an annual survey on employment and unemployment. So the protocol is that once the National Sample Survey Organization finalizes, there is a technical committee of experts consisting of statisticians. So they, even before they design, there are other experts who advise them on designing the survey, conducting the survey, and the results also checked by another standing committee. Then the report goes to the Statistical Commission, which is the final body, like a governing body, and they give their technical permission, and the government, this organization releases it. This time they were asked to stop release of that, but it got leaked. I'm sure some of you might have already read in Business Standard and other newspapers that the new survey data reveals that the unemployment statistic in India in 17-18 is the highest during the last 45 years. That is a cause for worry. So a government who is going to face the elections will not be happy with that. But that's a fact. This is the sum total of what you have been doing last 5 years, and you know new jobs are not being created, and in many states, except in some of the southern states like ours and in Punjab, there are scores of people from poorer states migrating and just doing whatever manual work that comes by. Our problem in Kerala is a very interesting problem. We have unemployment among the educated. In fact, if you take the entire, in the unemployment survey, you can see earlier surveys 11, 12, you look at the data and you find that 90% of the unemployed in Kerala has at least an SSLC pass. More than 30% already have a graduate degree. So it's the unemployment is not of the people who don't have any work. So if you are prepared to do manual work, that work is there. But once you are educated, it is quite natural that we will aspire for a job which is in tune with your training, in tune with your educational background. So it's not only GDP, but also we have cause for concern on the unemployment data, although they have not meddled with the methodology of calculation, at least withheld the results. Then you have the problem of the non-performing assets in the banking system, and there has been demand in the parliament, demand in the civil society, everywhere, asking the government to release the names of those who are the defaulters. Why shouldn't the government release? It's like thieves going into different places, and you are not Kallamarade list, they are not willing to put it up. And that itself is eroding your credibility. There is National Crime Bureau data on crime, various usual thefts and all that, crime against women, crime against children, all kinds of crime data is collected through police stations and aggregated at the national level, state-wise. National crime data methodology has been changed. Now suddenly you have a reduction in crime in India, last 3-4 years, because the methodology of calculating what is a crime, that definition has been changed. So every important national statistic is being tampered with. And today when I was going through budget papers, and I realized there used to be since 2005, and I must say this was initiated by a Malayali who was a finance secretary at that time, Mr. K.M. Chandrasekhar. There was a lot of demand in parliament that how much money is the government not able to get because of various concessions, subsidies, revenue forgone as a percentage of our GDP. And at that time it used to be something like 2.5 lakh crores. 2.5 lakh crores. So you can imagine it used to be 6% of the GDP. Now, last 4 years, there is no data. This supplementary information in the budget papers is missing. So which means they are not willing to say how much money the government, because this is a legitimate kind of thing. Even if you are giving money away for various purposes, legitimate reasons, maybe fertilizer subsidy, maybe some other subsidy to industries, other kinds of concessions, exemptions, all kinds of things. But we need to have a quantification of how much the government is willingly forgoing. So that is not there. So there is a certain amount of credibility, I would say a crisis of confidence, so far as national statistical the use of the national statistical institutions are concerned by the government, but nevertheless we now have no other alternative but to put up with that. It's a specialized field. Not every ordinary people will be excited by this, so because they wouldn't also understand what the methodology is. So but it is a problem, and we hope that things will be better sooner than later. When you come to this budget, there is also another important thing that you have to keep in mind. This is also politics, because in a political democracy, when the government is about to complete its term and the elections are coming, you don't present a full budget. So it is called an interim budget, but all the announcements, all the schemes, everything is as good as a full budget. But the parliament is going to give authority to the government only for expenditure for 2 months, because after 2 months you are going to have a new government. Even if the same government or same party or coalition comes back to power, they will have the opportunity to come with a new budget in June. Now you can say maybe they will stick on to the same budget. They may, they need not. So that's also given the level of confidence of political parties, so you never know whether they will change or not. But if they change, there is nothing wrong. If they change for the better. But the problem is, will they change for the worse? So that is it. But if the new government comes, then it will be according to their manifesto. So in a way, we are not really going to benefit by talking about the budget in great detail in all its compartments and all that. What I would like to do here is to discuss some of the larger problems which will remain, whether or not this budget is going to be changed in the next few months, or the same budget is going to be rehashed and presented. The problems will remain because some of the problems are deep-rooted and structural and concerns a large majority of the people. Now let me come to two important events why the government is jittery, and why is that they attempted even to tamper with the methodology in GDP, and now not even confident enough to allow the National Sample Survey to release its report. So partly because there is a widespread feeling, and that's all through agitation, through all kinds of decline in bank credit and various other indicators, that the impact of the demonetization exercise, which was like a bombshell, and the tardy implementation of the GST, both these have contributed to a slowdown in the economy, and many sectors are therefore facing a whole lot of difficulties. The most important sector which has suffered directly is what is called the small-scale unorganized sector, because this is a sector where people make a living by small capital investments, workshops, small industries, firms, or just by if you a woman or a man sitting in the street as a street vendor selling something, fish, fruits, vegetables. These are all called own account enterprises and all that. They are used to only dealing in cash. First of all, their educational and other background is not such that they deal with banks, papers, paperless money, or those kinds of things. Maybe there is a small minority of them, youngsters now, but majority of them deal with actual cash. When the demonetization exercise came, suddenly, we are short of cash to a great extent in the economy. And there is nothing but, the decline in the economic exchange and economic activity. There are sectors like construction, where it's not that they can't deal with non-cash money, but they deal with cash money because a lot of illegal transactions go on. And that's where India's black economy also is much more vibrant and vigorous. They also got affected because they couldn't continue their illegal activities, which is a good thing. But the impact of that is a stall in work. So a decline in construction activity, and therefore a decline in the national income, and therefore a decline in growth rate, which should have been reflected. But if you change the methodology and if you do some little bit of statistical tricks to say that the activity remains the same, then you get a higher growth rate. So there is a certain amount of economic, what I would say, well, I won't say recession, but a decline in economic activity that is causing a lot of concern. This is coming out indirectly because our exports are falling. And half our exports are contributed by small enterprises. So you can imagine. This is also revealed by the fact that the percentage of national income that is going into investment has reduced the last 5 years. When Manmohan Singh left the government, it was 32%. Now it is 28% of the GDP. This is like, I have a salary of 1,000 rupees. I spend only 700 rupees for my family. 300 rupees I save and invest so that I can engage in and generate more money, maybe in the bank or something. If it is a government that invests it in infrastructure and various kinds. So investment is very crucial for growth. So if the investment ratio comes down, then your growth will also come down. But that's not getting reflected here. So that is another problem. In the case of GST, for example, I'll give you an example which is directly related to this budget. In the, at the beginning of the last year, they expected when GST was launched that it will give the government, both central and state combined this, 6 lakh crores of rupees from GST. Now, after 6 or 7 months, the government revised it downwards and said we are expecting only 5 lakh crores of rupees. So a decline of 1 lakh crore of rupees. The actual collection after 10 months, that is by January, is only 3.76 lakh crores, which is an average of 37,000 crores per month. So if you take the remaining 2 months, another, let's say 74,000 lakh crores will be there. That will give you a total of, for 18-19, 4.5 lakh crores. So 6.5 actual will be 4.5. So this is the gap which is not going to be realized because the GST system did not function the way it was expected to function. There are people who say that they rushed it through, the systems were not in place, interstate movements and e-way bills were not in place when it was announced, and various, many ordinary items were taxed higher rate. So the traders and manufacturers, they tried to avoid paying the taxes. They couldn't afford this 18% on many things. Then they reduced it from 18 to 12%. So a lot of later, avoidable administrative, practices made it as ineffective as it is now realized. So if you then look at the total numbers in the budget that was presented, you don't find much of an increase by way of total expenditure. So from 25 lakh crores to 27.8 lakh crores. So you will say, yes, this is a almost 3 lakh crores increase. If you look at the finer print, you will find this 3 lakh crores is going to be met by an expectation of a much higher increase in GST next year, that is 1920. And they are expecting an increase as high as 30% in 1 year. Now, whether it is realistic or not, this is where the real issues come. If 30% increase has to be registered, then you must be able to say, yes, now the GST system is perfect. We have, taken care of all the loopholes and it is going to function. I don't think we have really reached that stage. So what will you do? So they also increase borrowings and other liabilities. So part of this gap, 3 lakh crores of increase, will be then plugged by more borrowings. Now, at the end of it, the test of the budget now, again, this is not something some of us are very fond of. They look at fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit means all revenue minus all expenditure, including interest payments. So interest payments becomes an obligation, and you have to reckon it as an expenditure. So this should not exceed more than 3%, equivalent to 3% of the GDP. Now it is 3.34% last year, and this year it's going to be the same. So some expenditure increases have been announced, but the fiscal deficit remains, the ratio remains the same. So again, the fine print, the details, if you look at what has happened is, in many departments, the ongoing expenditure has been cut down. So you have increased the expenditure for certain popular schemes, which I will come on, but you reduce the overall expenditure. For example, rural development doesn't get more than what you got last year, but there is a small increase in some of its national pension schemes and other schemes. So you also then play around with some of the numbers and announce those where you have increased, but you don't mention those existing schemes where you have reduced everything. So then you say, yes, we have managed to keep the budget in almost balance with the same kind of fiscal deficit. But let me come to some of the controversial or what is being debated today on an issue. You must have seen, or you must have also read in newspapers how the farmers were agitating. Tamil Nadu farmers for several days camped in New Delhi. They did all kinds of things to attract the attention of the powers that be. They went naked. They went with the skulls of the farmers who committed suicide. So they did all that they can do just to tell the country that how badly they are, especially in terms of indebtedness. The loans that they have taken, but the crops have not been as good as they expected, because crops are always vulnerable to fluctuations in output for various reasons. They are not able to pay, and most of the farmers in India, if you take the total number of farmers, 84% of the farmers are marginal and small farmers, which means 84% of the farmers have less than 2 hectares, 5 acres. So that's the kind of farming. That does not mean 84% of the land is also with them. No, the distribution of land is different. 84% of the farmers in India who are small and marginal have around 50% of the land. The remaining 16% of the farmers, they are big farmers, have the remaining 50% of the land. So which means per small farmer or small marginal farmer, the area would come to a very small fraction of the 5 acres that we are talking about. So basically, if you say, apart from the landless laborers, another category, agricultural and other laborers, the next poor section of the Indian population would be the small and marginal farmers. You can say at least they have some land, but there are people who have no land and they have to live on agricultural wages only. That is also a bigger story. Or ever since the 1991 economic reforms, neoliberalism, the thrust has been on industry and services like IT, tourism, infrastructure, and similar things. Agriculture experienced a relative neglect. So the public investment as a ratio of the total budget or as a ratio of the GDP has been coming down. Now, public investment in agriculture is very important for any country, because there are certain things which the farmers cannot do individually, even if you are a big farmer. For example, irrigation systems, canals, agricultural extension, new crops, experiments, new agronomy practices, pesticides, fertilizer production, and a whole range of things. Public investment is necessary. And it is this public investment which sustains the agricultural sector. Although the agriculture sector, the farmers don't get the prices that they deserve, which is an institutional problem. If you go to the vegetable market and buy a kilo of tomato, you will pay 40, 50, 60 rupees. But if you go to the grower in Bangalore, from where our tomatoes are coming, there are seasons where he wouldn't even get 5 rupees or 10 rupees. And there are reports when they have a bumper crop, this is a perishable commodity, they are even forced to sell to the middlemen at 1 rupee per kg. So we say in economics, the farm prices are flex prices. They are flexible prices because if you produce more, the price will come down. If you produce less, the price will go up, but then it will affect the consumers. So, and that is where public intervention, you need storage facilities, marketing facilities, or cooperatives of farmers so that they can get a more decent price. But these have not really worked effectively. So the government of India, way back from the 70s, started the what is called minimum support price, MSP, for various crops. It was extended. First it was wheat and rice, and then extended to 12 or 13 crops now. So before the harvesting, there is a Commission on Agricultural Costs and Prices. They will calculate the cost of production in various parts of the country, and they will announce that these are the costs that the average farmer incurs. So the price should be set at such and such minimum level. So there is a guarantee that if you go to the market, you have produced much more wheat or rice or oil seeds and all that. If the prices go down, then the government will buy at the minimum support price. So the price will not crash, which is an important institutional intervention. Last 5 years, the government has been saying, yes, we will give 50% more than the minimum support price, but they have not really done so. Even when they did in some cases, again there are, because the devil is always in the detail. Minimum support price or the costs are calculated in 3 different terms. One cost refers to only the money that you pay for all the raw materials, wages. The other cost B, takes into account if you have also worked as a farmer, your labor has to be valued, no? So it's the imputed value of your labor. And a third cost is there where not only this is taken into account, the land, some of them the land is on rent, some land is mine. And your land is rented, my land is mine, but both of us should have the same rentals, imputed value. So they add that value. So it depends on which cost you take. So the A is, the first one is the least cost, the third one covers all the costs. So there are these kinds of technicalities are there. That is why farmers always agitate on what kind of MSP, the minimum support price, that they should get from the government. That has not really happened. So farmers' suicides continue, and you come every cycle, there is a indebtedness problem. And unlike in Kerala, where at least a good number of families are lucky to have their people in Dubai and other countries, where you just have to wait for the bank transfer. Not all states in India are that lucky, except perhaps Punjab, and to a little extent maybe Gujarat. But most other states, remittance is not exactly a great source of money coming in. If you are seeing some sign of prosperity consumption in Kerala, it's all by our brothers and sisters who are sending back money regularly to their families. And there is a multiplier effect. If I get money, I spend on my children's education, that becomes the income of the school or hospital or the market. I have a new house, then I spend the money, then the construction people get the wages and prices for their materials, so there is a multiplier effect. It is that multiplier effect that we have been experiencing. So some of these problems we may not be really seeing when we say about farmers' crisis. This government has announced 6,000 rupees per farmer, which means per farmer household. Now 6,000 rupees, it looks like not a bad idea, but 6,000 rupees per year, which means 500 rupees per month. So if a farmer has an average family size of 5 people, how much you get? You get about, and you divide it by 30 days, it comes some 17 rupees per day. If you say the government is giving you 500 rupees as a farmer, in Kerala, a single day's wage is more than 500 rupees. So it is almost like a joke. It's almost like, even in other states where the wages are not as high as in Kerala or Punjab, but between 150 to 250. So it will like a 2 days wage being given. For farmer who is really supplying to the rest of the population all the food articles that are needed and also the raw materials that are needed for all kinds of agro-processing industry. So that macroeconomic impact, we don't give credit to the farmer. But many rich countries do. Because when we say, there are people, especially if you look at the English channels, economic channels, they will say farmers' money is a doling out. When you give money to industry, they'll say it's incentive. So if an industrialist gets money from the government, it is incentive. If a farmer gets, it's a doling, it's a waste, it's a doling out. If you look at carefully, and I urge you, some of you, those who are interested in FAO, World Agricultural Reports, every farmer in Japan has one of the highest productivity in agriculture. They produce rice, they are also rice eaters like us. Average productivity is 7 tons per hectare. In Kerala it is 2.5. All India is 2.1. So you can imagine. Even then, if a farmer gets $100, 60% of that comes as subsidy from the government. So that to keep his income at an attractive level so that he doesn't run away from the farming occupation. If you are in European Union, if a farmer's income is 100, 50% of that comes from government subsidy. And in Europe, you will find that in some countries, because like in dairy sector, the milk productivity is so high, they have mountains of milk powders and all that. They also encourage farmers not to grow. So if you keep your certain portion of your land as grassland, then you get an incentive. So it is that much of care given to agriculture. So 50% of the farmers' income come from government subsidy. In the United States, where of course they have a small farm is less than 500 hectares, a small farm. So they have ranches, 5,000, 10,000 hectares of land. Even there, a farmer's 1/3 of a farmer income comes from government transfer of subsidies or incentives. You might ask, why do they spend so much money? That is because the food sector, the agriculture sector is the basic sector without which we can do everything. You can work on IT, you can work on aerospace and everything. But at the end, every day you need to eat. Every day you need to have your clothes, and the cotton should come from agriculture sector, isn't it? So there are many things which indirectly is supported by the agriculture sector. So therefore, most rich countries, they have. So as we grow and the proportion of people in agriculture comes down and the proportion of income generated also comes down, then the non-agriculture sector is in a better position to protect the agriculture because less number of people. The dependence on agriculture is less. So that is also to be something to be welcomed. So the farmers, this 6,000 rupee, I would say it's almost like a joke. And that's what you will also hear many commentators have said that. Because you just compare this with the income that is now going to the pockets of urban middle class by way of tax incentive. Now, if you have income less than 5 lakhs, taxable income, you can add 1.5 lakhs more to it because that 1.5 lakh will get a tax reduction if you invest it in certain specified funds. So it's called 80cc exemption. So you can go and put it in a fixed deposit in a bank and claim income tax deduction up to 1.5 lakhs. So effectively up to 6.5 lakh, you don't have to pay income tax. Earlier it was 3 lakh plus 1.5, 4.5, so 2 lakhs. For 2 lakhs, if the marginal rate is 5%, you get what? 10,000 rupees straight into your pocket. Or if it is 10% is the marginal rate, you get 20,000 rupees. Plus now you have the standard reduction has been raised from 10 to 40,000. If you own a second house, there are millions of people in India who don't even have a decent decent shelter. But the income tax now will say, if I have a second house, I don't have to pay tax. Otherwise, the second house First house I don't have to pay because I am living there. The second house, they will impute a rent, even if I don't give it on a rent, because it could have been used for renting, and then it will come as an income to be on which tax to be paid. So now you can have that concession. So if you put together all these concessions, you will get around 20,000 rupees of savings every month in the urban middle class. So it's also clear where they are putting the money, where the votes are coming from. So in a way, there is a political message. If you support us, then you will get much more concession. But what's much more, I think, regrettable as a development student, as a development economist, I would say there is a complete neglect of agricultural laborers. The farmers have been recognized nominally at least 500 rupees per month, although it is nothing much being given, but there is nothing for agricultural laborers. If there are 12.5 crores, 125 million farmers, there is an equal number or little more, about 130 million agricultural and other rural laborers like fisher workers, forestry, and various kinds of primary sector activities. If you look at Indian poverty, the highest incidence of poverty is among this group of people. Rural, landless laborers. They are mostly casual laborers, mostly people with less education. Less than 35% of them are either illiterate in India, not the case of Kerala, or less than 5 years. Another 35% less than 8 years of schooling. So that's the kind of statistics we have. There is absolutely nothing. Indirectly, the government has come out with a scheme that will earn them a 3,000 rupees pension when you reach age 60. Now, there are a whole lot of people, 130 million people, landless laborers. You are telling them if you pay 100 rupees per month as contribution, the government will pay 100 rupees. And when you reach 60, you will get 3,000 rupees. Their calculation is tomorrow or next week, what will I do? So that's the kind of labor market that we have. So you are promising them a moon when their moonshine is going to go off at the end of the life. And they are not going to live. Many of them are not really going to live up to 60 years because the All India life expectancy is around now 67, which includes all of us. We will live much longer. We do live much longer. So the poorer you are, the shorter your life expectancy. And that is universally established for obvious reasons. You have less nutrition, you have less health protection, you have less home amenities where you can take care of yourself. So poor has always been experiencing a higher mortality. So I would say that from a social point of view, from a social justice point of view, what is the biggest drawback of this budget? I would say there is no concern for the poorest of this country. Now, what about employment? Now, I said the leaked NSS report says that unemployment is the highest in the last 45 years. If that is so, and anyway the report will come, maybe delayed by another 2 months because of the elections, so the report will come, then I have a feeling that it might affect a whole generation of youth, both educated and uneducated, because there's a total decline. There is a independent agency, it's called Center for the Monitoring of Indian Economy. They have now started, because the government delay in the labor force surveys, they have started their own surveys, catching around 2 lakh households, whole of India, which is a very good enough sample. And they have said that around 11 million jobs have been lost last 5 years. Jobs lost, not jobs created. So which means we are now talking about going into the negative territory. What we need is, every year we need, what I would say more realistically, there is a 1.6% growth in the labor force, something around 7.5 to 8 million newcomers in the labor force. That means when our children are growing, when they reach 18, normally in India, most of them get into the labor force. Now, of course, the proportion who are going into the educational institution is increasing everywhere, especially among girls, among young women. That is supposed to be one reason for the decline in the participation of women in the labor force, which some of us have done. I myself have done an exercise along with a colleague of mine. What we found is that the decline of women in the labor force, due to their increase in the enrollment in higher education, can explain only up to 80%. The remaining 20% is withdrawal from the labor market because there is no opportunity. And we trace that to rural economy, and we trace that most of them were in agriculture. Now, there are many reasons put on that, because most of the people who have withdrawn from labor force is not a voluntary withdrawal, because there is no alternative job. In states like Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, UP, Eastern UP especially, the withdrawal of these women were due to the men migrate to urban area. There is no work in the villages, so they migrate. So as long as the men were there, the women, their wives, they were helping them in their vocation. So if they are doing some farming, the women will also do farming. So in the national sample survey, there is a clause to catch all people who are working, and they ask the women, are you working and assisting any member of the family in economic activities like rearing animals, agriculture, or running a tea shop? Usually if husband and wife together run the workshop, you cannot say how much income husband is getting, how much income is. So the husband will say, yes, this is our tea shop and we make this much. She is helping me. So women are then classified as unpaid family labor. Now we have 80 to 90 million women in this category in this country. So one of the main demands of feminist economists or economists who are talking about more effective participation of women is that we have to recognize them, because they are engaged, they are also engaged in the act of economic activity in production, but it doesn't translate itself into money for themselves. It's money for family. So what do we do? How do other countries do that? They are recognized by creating facilities for them, better child care, better health care, crash facilities, more transportation for going to school, so various other kinds of things. So we don't say that what is being given in the name of women's education is doling out. This is, in a way, you are compensating for them for the kind of work that they are doing. Often women's work in most parts of India, the urban India may be changing, the middle class may be changing, and I'm sure most of your girls can equal your boys in very many things and challenge them even in earning jobs, but that is not the story for the whole of India. For the whole of India, the story is a very difficult story. The women's mobility is very limited, because men go or they have to go. Women have many other security concerns. So their economic opportunities get confined to their local economy. And when the agricultural is in a crisis or rural economy is in a crisis, they are the first to go out of employment. And that is not by voluntary choice, it is by force of circumstances. There's nothing in the budget by way of increasing employment for these people. Now you will say, what about NREGS? Yes. The interesting part of NREG is neither the UPA nor the NDA has really taken NREGS seriously to create employment and income to the most deserving people, because the average number of days of employment generated in NREG remains less than 50. It's about 45 days per participating worker in the whole of India. Whether you take Kerala, Punjab, anywhere, this average has only plus or minus a few. In Kerala is again 46, national average is 45. So it doesn't make much of a difference. If this scheme is augmented, and if you provide 100 days of employment, which we all say is also limited, but still, then on an average in Kerala, for example, if I take Kerala NREG wages, if you get 50 days of employment in a year, and in Kerala it's 90% are women workers, they get about 15,000 rupees out of that. If you double it, 100 days, it will become 30,000 rupees. And that is wages earned. It's not just free money that is coming. So you can imagine, similarly, for the rest of the country, if they do that, what you need is about 2.31 lakh crores of rupees. What is provided is 60,000 crores of rupees. It is 1,000 crores less than last year's budget. They might say, yes, it is demand determined, so if there is more demand for employment, we will pay more. But that has been the case for the last 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. So this is one area where the government could have really remedied the unemployment problem to some extent. But then there is also a greater problem looming large, that is the educated unemployment. And you know very well, and I also personally know because my daughter is also involved, that there are no new posts created in universities, colleges. You have degrees, master's degrees, PhDs, and people are on contract. Now it's contract job everywhere. So you are exactly like a casual labor, except that you can dress well and come into a classroom and talk to students. That's the only difference. You get X amount of rupees per class. That is the thing. Despite there being, so for example, I know for sure, Delhi University, because some of our friends work there, Delhi University has 4,000 vacancies of faculty for the last 4 years. And all these 4,000, they have been going on with contract labor of 6 months. So you get a 6-month appointment, then you are terminated. After 2 days, you are called back, and again you are on contract. So there is what we say, there is an informalization of the employment market. What we are all looking for is decent jobs, more secure jobs. What's happening is exactly. But on the other hand, what is happening, we are expanding the higher education capacity. There is a greater aspiration naturally among boys and girls. There is a greater enrollment in almost all higher education levels, and we are producing a lot more people with educational degrees and aspirations, but not jobs. So that is an explosive situation. I don't know how we are going to handle that. The problem with this budget is that there is no recognition of this problem or a way to address that yes, this is what we intend to do. We could have said that if we come back to power, this is what we are going to do. This is the sectors we are going to give more importance, additional concessions, infrastructure, various other kinds of skilling programs, but not much of that. So in a way, the priorities are fairly well laid out. And if you look at today's Hindu, there is a centerpiece by Pooja Mehra. She's an economic commentator. She very interestingly, she says the benefits are structured along political favors and class lines. So the best deal is for the corporate sector, because they have already been enjoying that for the last 4 years, because their corporate tax rate has been cut by Arun Jaitley in the first budget itself. Then public-private project viability gap. So you say you propose a project along with the government, and then you show a gap, and that gap will come as a grant from the government. Most of the NPAs, the reason why they don't want to put out the list of the NPA, the defaulters in public sector banks, is that most of them are private corporate sectors, ending with Ambanis, Adanis, and all Anis are there. So, so it is a very clearly stated deal. Followed by urban middle class, you have all the income tax concessions and various consumption loans for vehicles, fridges, what have you, all kinds of white goods. Then you have the traders and the small scale industry. They say they have a Mudra bank, and Mudra bank is giving loan to small scale industry. The only problem is loans are being given, but we are not getting it in terms of output. If that was there, then more employment would have been created, more growth would have taken place. Then the come farmers and then the landless laborers. So that is the order of priority. It's pretty not a very interesting picture that I am giving you, but for me, this is the way I look at it. Because the government, an elected government of whatever color, I think has a primary obligation to start with the bottom and not with the top. And because inequality is not a kind of desirable thing. Equality is not just a desirable thing. There's a whole lot of literature which talks about why equality is good for efficiency. Because inequality can create a lot of social disharmony, lack of solidarity, therefore lack of group motivation, productivity, and economy. The highest productivity is in Japan. They have the lowest economic inequality within Japan. And again, one of the highest productivity economies is the Scandinavian countries, which one of the highest tax rates, and they have the least social pathologies, whether it is of crime or morbidity or any kind of this thing. So equality is not just a morally desirable thing. Equality has a very, I think, serious economic content in it. And if the government of the day doesn't take cognizance of that, that's why you find, of course, in India, it is not yet become. Every year the Oxfam puts out its inequality report, you have seen. We never heard of billionaires from India. Now we are counting how many will be there. Now it is 13, and next year it's supposed to go by 15, 16. So this is the way now we are talking about. So how many billionaires are going to be there? Yes, there are some areas and some people might have gained. There is a 21% increase in allocation for northeastern states. So because northeast has been northeastern states where they have come into power probably. There's an interesting category who is going to benefit, and this is the cows. And we might laugh at it, but it might be better to be born as a cow than an agricultural laborer, because you are going to have a Gokul mission. And it is also named Gokul mission will have cow protection centers, cow welfare centers. So anything to do with the cow that you will have. But I can see a very interesting corollary here, because most of this practice is in the Bimaru states. You know the Bimaru syndrome? Bimaru states, the Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, UP. Now if you take that heartland of India, which is called the cow belt, that's why the cow is being, not that we don't revere the cow. In fact, again, I want to bring your attention, in the Center for Development Studies, Professor Raj, who is the founder, and also some of his disciples, we did a lot of work on livestock economics, on the cow. And we found that the rate is the highest in Kerala. That is because we value the cow as an economic capital, the milk, because we don't have much of a land for the bull to give work. So we protect cows and probably weed out the bulls. It's the other way around in UP, Bihar, and other places. It's just like the sex ratio among human beings. There are less cows per 100 bulls there. So statistically, if you to look at it empirically, what you say in terms of your beliefs, rituals, and great high fundas and all that, it's not practiced. So that's also another irony of this country. I think I have taken enough time. If there are questions, I am willing to respond. But I will close it by saying one or two things, because I see a lot of students there. One of the basic tenets of a government engaged in public expenditure is that the governments have certain responsibilities from which they cannot absolve themselves, the primary obligations of the state. Then there is in poor countries like ours, there is a secondary obligation, because primary obligations like security, education, health, sanitation, yes. The secondary obligation is the developmental obligation, because that is why we are talking about development plans, because we are talking about a new government, new schemes and all that. But all these depend on how much the government is able to collect from the economy and spend it. So there is a what we call a tax to GDP ratio. Tax includes non-tax revenues, everything, all the income that government gets. Now, there are studies which says that for a certain level of income and certain size of the economy, what is a desirable ratio? So the institutions like IMF, who do a lot of work on fiscal issues, they have considered India and similar countries that the government system in India should at least collect around 25% of the national income as government income for meeting its expenditure. Our actual is 17.8, so 8%. We are deficient by 7%. If you compare us with China, China is almost 19.5%. So they are deficient only by 4.5%, although they are also deficient. If you take a country like Vietnam, which is in a way poorer than us by per capita terms, but much more like Kerala with education, health and infant mortality and other things, they collect 22.2%. And Vietnam, mind you, is one of the fastest growing economies now. That is, their earlier investment in health and education, just like us in Kerala, are now paying off. So you must also look for, of all these details and others, what is the tax GDP ratio and how does it compare with similarly placed economies. Then you can make a relative judgment whether we are really doing our homework, as the government, whether our government is really doing their homework. India is highly deficient on that. We are also a member of the BRICS and we take pride in that. But if you take any indicator, again it's not a very good news, we are the last in the BRICS category, whether by per capita income or by education and also by tax GDP ratio. If you take Brazil, Brazil collects 35.6% of its income, tax GDP ratio, which is one of the highest. I don't know how it is. Russia is 23, South Africa is 29, and China is 19.4. So even if you consider among our club members that we are not doing that well. So I will stop at that.